To welcome you on behalf of University of Florida IFAS Extension Polk County to our gardening and landscaping webinar today. This is brought to you through a collaboration from the City of Lakeland and the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program and our Extension Office. Our webinar team consists of Ann Yazelanis, our residential horticulture agent and master gardener volunteer coordinator, and I'm Julie Shelb, the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program coordinator. We also have a master gardener volunteer helping us today. We're going to talk about garden drama with ornamental grasses. So we're going to look at Florida Friendly Landscaping, a brief introduction to that. We'll look at some benefits of utilizing ornamental grasses in the landscape, a little bit on how to care for them and maintain them. We're also going to look at a selection of ornamental grasses to use in your landscape. It's not all inclusive. There's certainly plenty more than we're going to talk about today, but we'll kind of highlight some of the, I guess, more common ornamental grasses. And then we'll also look at examples of ornamental grasses in the landscape and kind of how they're practically used. But first, we'll start with Florida Friendly Landscaping. And so Florida Friendly Landscaping is a way that we can maintain our landscapes that fits with our climate here in Florida. And so there's 9 easy to follow principles. And, by utilizing these practices, we're able to reduce our use of water, fertilizer, and pesticides in the landscape in an effort to protect our natural resources, particularly our water resources here in Florida, while still maintaining beautiful landscapes. And so the foundation of Florida Friendly Landscaping is right plant, right place. And so that's super appropriate for today's conversation. We want to make sure that we match plants to our site conditions. That allows these plants to thrive. They're going to be less susceptible to pest and disease problems. Certainly we want to water efficiently. We don't want to waste water by overusing it. Certainly that's a waste of this natural resource, but also too much water can be a problem for certain plants. And so knowing your plant's water needs, grouping them by their water needs. So, keeping plants that need that supplemental irrigation together versus grouping your more drought tolerant plants so that they don't have to have irrigation and so that some don't get overwatered or underwatered. Certainly fertilizing appropriately, not fertilizing before heavy rain, using the right type of fertilizer for the plant, and that's going to vary, and of course following the label. Utilizing mulch in the landscape. So mulch is a great benefit. Keeping a 2 to 3 inch layer of like a tree-based mulch like pine straw or melaleuca or eucalyptus will help maintain soil moisture and reduce weeds and erosion in the landscape. Of course, we want to attract wildlife, and so by providing a landscape with vertical layering, so ground covers, shrubs, trees, water sources, fruiting trees as well as food sources is a great way to attract wildlife in your Florida Friendly landscape. Certainly controlling yard pests responsibly, so getting out there scouting, correctly identifying, knowing if that pest, if any action is needed and what steps could be taken to help minimize that pest in the landscape, if any at all are needed. Recycling yard waste, and so that's as simple as when you mow your lawn, just leaving your grass clippings on the lawn. If you have trees that lose their leaves, letting those leaves stay there and creating a self-mulching area. And of course, composting your yard waste on site is also another way. Reducing stormwater runoff is super important here in Florida. With such a long rainy season and so much rain over the summer here in Florida, we have tons of stormwater runoff. So rain hits our roofs and hits our driveways, these impermeable surfaces, our roadways. And so ways to mitigate that stormwater runoff is to provide, more permeable spaces in our landscape, diverting your downspouts from your gutters into lawn or landscape areas, utilizing rain barrels, things like that. And of course, we want to protect the waterfront. So whether you live on a body of water or not, it's important to remember that everything that we do in our landscape affects some body of water here in Florida. We have watersheds, and so we're all connected to the water. But particularly if you do live on a body of water, Florida Friendly Landscaping would recommend that you create a 10-foot maintenance-free zone where you don't mow, you don't fertilize, and you don't use pesticides in an effort to prevent excess nutrients or chemicals from getting into that body of water. And so by practicing these 9 principles of Florida Friendly Landscaping, you have a much more environmentally friendly landscape that's still beautiful and enjoyable. So what are the benefits of ornamental grasses? Well, certainly they can be very low maintenance. Not a lot of maintenance is required once established. Many of them are drought tolerant as well. So if you're looking to plant in an area where maybe you don't have access to irrigate, ornamental grasses can definitely be a huge benefit. And of course, if you're trying to reduce your use of water in the landscape, adding ornamental grasses would help with that as well. Often ornamental grasses don't have many pest problems, not that they're pest-free, but they can be less susceptible to pest problems. And they're dynamic, and so I love that word. That actually comes from one of our Master Gardener volunteers who utilizes that word to help describe the benefits of these ornamental grasses. They're dynamic in that, one, just they can, change with the season. And so a lot of people think we don't have fall color here in Florida, and while we don't have maybe the color that the northern United States experiences, we do have our own set of fall color, and so many of these ornamental grasses can act to provide that fall and winter color in the landscape. Certainly these grasses move with the wind, so when you think about maybe a sensory garden or just that sound or that vision of those ornamental grasses blowing in the wind, so I love that description of dynamic. And additionally, ornamental grasses can provide food and shelter for wildlife. So, it can be a place for them to hang out, maybe on a hot day, but you're providing some space for them away from everything else while still adding to the beauty of your landscape. So these ornamental grasses, they come in a wide range of sizes, colors, even textures. Many have kind of beautiful flowering displays as well seasonally, so really great benefits of using ornamental grasses. So thinking about maintaining your ornamental grasses, well, we're going to talk a little bit more about pruning, but you definitely want to prune them at the right time of year. If you prune your grasses too early, which unfortunately some people misunderstand when to prune their ornamental grasses, and so now is definitely not the time. Many of the ornamental grasses are starting to flower now, and so certainly if you prune them now, you'd be missing one of the main benefits of ornamental grasses, their beautiful fall and winter displays. But other than that, you might think about maybe as your ornamental grasses grow, you might want to dig them up and kind of divide them. Certainly if they've filled up a space and are no longer the right plant for the right place, you might consider dividing them. Certainly you could create a large mass of these ornamental grasses through just a few plants and dividing them. Also, when you think about maintaining your grasses, you want to remove any spent flowers or seed heads as well if you're trying to maintain kind of a neat or less natural look with these ornamental grasses. So it's perfectly fine to trim those off. Now, pruning your ornamental grasses, like I mentioned, it's so important to get that timing correct. And so it should be done in late winter or early spring. You want to try to catch pruning your grasses just before they start to produce that new growth in the spring. And like I said, many of these grasses have this beautiful fall and winter characteristics that we want to save. So pruning them too early would definitely remove that option. So if you're in North and Central Florida, you want to prune your ornamental grasses in February or March. Now, if you're in South Florida, you want to catch it a little bit earlier in January or February. Just you're a little bit warmer, so they might start their new growth a little bit earlier. But here in Central Florida, we can prune them in February or March. Additionally, you may not have to prune back your grasses. Certainly you can, but it's not always necessary. So kind of just look at the growth in late winter and decide, you know, whether that's necessary. And if you really don't need to prune them back, you can always just use a rake or a pitchfork to kind of comb out those dead leaves. But if you do decide you want to prune back your ornamental grasses, you want to cut them, particularly your deciduous ornamental grasses, so grasses that are going to go dormant in the winter. So if you've noticed, all of the leaves have kind of look as though they've died. They've kind of gone dormant, but it'll regrow in the spring, and so you can cut those back to about 12 inches above the ground. Now, dividing your ornamental grasses, we kind of hit on that a little bit earlier. So your ornamental grasses can be divided when you're pruning them. That might be a good time. When you're trying to prune them back, you've made them slightly smaller, easier to handle as well, so they're not as large, not as heavy, and so that would be a great time to kind of divide them. Now, it's not necessary, so you don't have to divide your ornamental grasses. So if you've truly followed right plant, right place, and those grasses just don't need to be divided to fit in the space, then it's really not necessary. But, you know, you may want to make more plants. You may really love that plant and decide, hey, a mass planting of these would be really nice, and that's a great economical way to provide more of those plants. You might also think about dividing them. If you look at that picture in the upper left, you can see kind of how the center has started to die out of that plant, and so certainly you could divide that plant up and keep that that fresh growth that you have around it as well. So now we'll take a look at a short selection of some of the ornamental grasses that you can utilize in the landscape. So first, this is my absolute favorite. You're probably going to see a million photos of Muhly grass throughout this presentation today. I think it's just absolutely stunning, particularly this time of year. So Muhly grass is a Florida native plant. It prefers full sun, of course, if you want to maximize the flowering, which is definitely one of the great characteristics of this plant. But it can tolerate part shade or kind of dappled shade. So keep that in mind. You know, if you need to fill in a space, it won't flower as much, but in full sun, it's just outstanding. Can get to about 3 to 4 feet tall and wide, so you want to allow for some space. And it has these beautiful pinkish purple flowers in the fall. And so Muhly grasses are probably just starting to flower now. They flower in October and through November. And it's just outstanding. If you're here in Polk County, I would definitely recommend one of my favorite displays of Muhly grass in kind of a large mass planting is, if you're familiar with Lake Alfred, there's Mackay Gardens. And just in front of Mackay Gardens, in their median, they have planted Muhly grass. And when it's in full bloom, it's absolutely beautiful. I try to get a glimpse of it every year because it's a really outstanding display. So Muhly grass can be planted as a specimen plant, but it really is a showstopper when planted in mass, and it has that beautiful fall color. Muhly grass can also be utilized in rain gardens, as can many of the ornamental grasses that can tolerate drought and also a little bit of moisture. Now it can't just sit in standing water, but for a rain garden, it can tolerate that short time period with that influx of rain. So really a beautiful, beautiful ornamental grass. Here's just a few more pictures. So other than in the fall, you know, in October and into November, it's kind of just a green grass otherwise, but that anticipation for it to bloom in the fall is well worth it. Next up, we have Fakahatchee grass, and this is another Florida native plant. Prefers full sun. Now this is a fairly large ornamental grass, so definitely if you're going to plant Fakahatchee grass, make sure you have space for it. You definitely want to utilize right plant, right place, up to 6 feet tall and wide. So that's a fairly large grass, but you know, if you have a space that you kind of need to fill in with something that you really don't want to maintain, and, you know, an ornamental grass seems like the right option, Fakahatchee might just be the one, because you could utilize fewer plants and really just fill in. Now it has wide leaf blades and it tolerates moist or dry soils, and it is an evergreen plant. Now, particularly thinking about this evergreen, you know, occasionally you may want to rake out your Fakahatchee grass just to kind of, you know, get out some of those dead leaves, but doesn't require a lot of maintenance, but definitely needs some room. So here's just a couple more images of that Fakahatchee grass. You can see certainly could be utilized as a background plant in a landscape bed, or even a specimen plant. It's just really nice. Now, there is a dwarf Fakahatchee. So Fakahatchee, the regular species was too large for you. You might consider dwarf Fakahatchee. This is also a Florida native. It only gets about 2 to 3 feet tall and wide, so much smaller. If you like the look of that grass, here's just a smaller version to help fill in your landscape beds. Additionally, this is going to have a much narrower leaf blade than the other species of Fakahatchee. Again, moist or dry soils, and this grass is also known as gamma grass, so maybe you've heard of that. And here's just a few more pictures of that dwarf Fakahatchee. Gets to about 2 to 3 feet tall. So if you love the look of ornamental grasses, or you like the idea of a sensory garden, definitely Fakahatchee creates kind of that noise sensory in the garden when the wind blows through it. Here's another Florida native grass. This is sandcord grass. Again, prefers full sun, can get 3 to 5 feet tall and wide as well. So kind of in between some of the grasses we've already talked about. Again, moist or dry soils, so pretty adaptable. Now, speaking of fall color, winter color, it's going to turn a sandy color in the winter. So definitely, if you love seasonal change in the landscape, I know I do. I just particularly, I know just these fall colors in the Florida landscape can definitely be achieved. And so sandcord grass can be another grass to kind of help you get fall color in the landscape, or winter color. There's just a few more pictures of that sandcord grass displayed. And again, you know, definitely works well in a mass planting if you need to fill in some space or have, you know, kind of a slope to plant on. We'll talk about uses for ornamental grasses in just a little bit. Here's Elliott's lovegrass. Now this is another Florida native ornamental grass, but it's much smaller. So it only gets to about 1 foot tall and 1 foot wide. It can tolerate full sun to part shade, and it is very drought tolerant. Now it has these kind of beige or white flowers in the fall. The lovegrass at the Elliott's lovegrass in our demonstration garden here in Bartow at the Extension office is currently in full bloom. And so I'll show you a picture of what that looks like in bloom in just a second. It does reseed itself, so it goes kind of dormant in the winter, but it'll reseed and come back. And so here are those tiny little flowers that you get to see on this lovegrass. Again, very small, you know, just around 1 foot tall and 1 foot wide. But so if you're looking for kind of an ornamental grass to act as a ground cover, particularly if you have, you know, full sun or just part sun, this might work to help fill in that landscape bed. Additionally, we have purple lovegrass, so another Florida native, and just like the other Elliott's, or the other lovegrass, excuse me, it's going to stay, you know, slightly small, maybe just slightly larger, maybe just a few feet taller and wider, but prefers full sun and has these pretty little pink and purple flowers. And so here's just a few more pictures of the purple fountain grass, or I'm sorry, excuse me, the purple Elliott's love grass. Next up, we have fountain grass. And so again, this grass is going to prefer full sun, and it gets to about 3 to 4 feet tall and wide. And so this will give you flowers just about year round. So it doesn't kind of give you that seasonal color, but otherwise just kind of gives interest year round, which can be important too, depending on where you're going to utilize these ornamental grasses. And so you can kind of see the look. It definitely looks very different from several of the ornamental grasses, especially in the kind of flower seed head that it produces as well. This is bamboo muhly grass, and so I really, this is such a unique ornamental grass, I think. Prefers full sun. Now, you definitely need to have some space available for this ornamental grass. It gets, can get up to 6 feet tall and wide, so it's a pretty large grass. Very drought tolerant once established, and so it kind of looks like bamboo from a distance, with the beautiful kind of blooms and leaves, and just really, really unique and very different. So, you know, if you're looking for kind of I think it works very well as kind of a specimen planting. You know, one of these will definitely fill in an area. So definitely consider bamboo muhly grass if you've got the space. Now, Mondo grass, speaking of ornamental, so we're talking about ornamental grasses. Now, Mondo grass is not a turf grass, but, you know, more of an ornamental grass. When you think of that, I think it is not actually a true grass either, as in the ornamental grasses, but it might be. But anyway, it acts as a ground cover. And so Mondo grass can tolerate shade. So if you've got an area that you kind of need a ground cover, you might consider Mondo grass. And so again, shade or even dappled light kind of under a tree, it will tolerate. And the really cool thing about Mondo grass is that there is a dwarf version that only gets to a couple inches tall, and you can see that on the right. But the normal Mondo grass is a very, still that narrow leaf, but it gets to about maybe 6 to 12 inches tall. Now, not to be confused with liriope, which is another type of border grass that people utilize in the landscape. But this, again, is a different genus and species. But you know, if you like, it definitely looks like grass, particularly the dwarf version. And so it's not super wear tolerant. So if you want to utilize it in a shady spot, you know, where not a lot else is growing, but you don't want something very tall, you're looking for kind of a ground cover. Mondo grass is great. I would definitely, if it's a high traffic area, you might consider putting some type of pathway in between. Otherwise, you'll be wearing a pathway regardless. So you might as well start out with one, but definitely a great ornamental grass for a shady spot in the landscape. Now we have a Panicum cultivar heavy metal. So if you're looking for an ornamental grass with maybe a different color leaf, if you will, or blade, this kind of has a bluish gray leaf. So it kind of gives that hue in the landscape. And so that can be very interesting as well. If you're trying to change up a landscape bed, you can change the color of the foliage in the landscape bed. So it's not just that green, it kind of has that bluish gray hue to it. Now this gets to about 4 to 5 feet tall, prefers full sun. So again, a large grass, but again, it has just a slightly different color. Again, speaking of kind of an ornamental grass that has, you know, that a slightly different color than just kind of green, Chalky Bluestem as another option, and it also prefers full sun but can tolerate part shade. Can get to about 2 to 3 foot tall, but it stays much narrower. Most of the ornamental grasses we previously looked at got just as wide as they do tall, but For a much narrower planting, chalky bluestem fits that. And so, you know, just about a foot, but a little bit taller. And so it's got that kind of chalky blue hue to those leaves. And then it has these beautiful tan flowers in the fall. So again, thinking of kind of seasonal interest with these ornamental grasses. And here you can see that chalky blue stem and those beautiful tan colors that it produces in the fall. So just another option. Now this is breeze grass. It's a cultivar breeze, and so it prefers full sun. It's an evergreen. So if you're looking for an evergreen grass, it gets to about 2 to 3 feet tall and wide. So again, you know, we've talked about the size of these ornamental grasses. So, you know, if you kind of don't want the small ornamental grasses, but the really large ones didn't fit your landscape, thinking about right plant, right place, maybe consider this breeze grass because it's only 2 to 3 feet tall and wide. It's an evergreen grass, so you won't have to cut it back. Just, you know, occasional combing of the dead leaves will help refresh the look of that ornamental grass. Here's just a few more views of that grass in use, and you can see definitely it looks nice as a kind of a clumping or a mass planting of an ornamental grass. Again, only 2 to 3 feet tall and wide. Okay, so now we'll look at some examples of how ornamental grasses can be used in the landscape. And I really love these ideas, and I want to thank the Master Gardener who's helping us today. Sue actually helped put this together, so we have some practical ways to use our ornamental grasses in the landscape. So here you can see ornamental grasses can be used as a foundation planting. So, you know, they can be the backdrop to the wall in a landscape bed and kind of provide, you know, a single row of that foundation planting in the landscape. Additionally, some of the smaller grasses can be used to help define a border. And so I think that's a really excellent use, especially, you know, maybe you've got an area with some washout or something, or you're just trying to create an edging. And so these smaller ornamental grasses will definitely help fit that characteristic. Certainly, many of the ornamental grasses we've talked about can act as a focal point or a specimen planting, you know, particularly the larger ones or the ones that have, you know, kind of that beautiful flower on the end, definitely will create that focal point in the landscape. Additionally, you could edge or border a walkway and also create some type of privacy to separate different areas of the landscape. And here's that muhly grass again, and I absolutely love muhly grass. It does not look like that year round, but it is well worth having in the landscape to see that beautiful bloom in the fall. And so again, muhly grass, while it only gets to about 3 to 4 feet, once it has those blooms on it, it does add a little bit more height, maybe around 5 feet tall. So, you know, it just adds a little bit more to that separation or that privacy that you might be creating with a border or, you know, a screening. Additionally, we've talked about utilizing these ornamental grasses to kind of separate or create lines, and so edging along a curb as well. So there's not much to do. You just plant the ornamental grasses and they kind of, you know, create that edge along the curb, and you don't have much work. Additionally, using them along the curb, if you have a mulched landscape bed, which we would certainly recommend mulch in a landscape, you don't have that mulch washout along the curb. So they've created, you know, they're helping to stabilize that soil along the edge of the curb and keep the mulch in the bed if you're, you know, experiencing washout, you know, along a sidewalk or a roadway. Another excellent use of ornamental grasses would be to help prevent erosion. Particularly if you've got a slope or a hill, these ornamental grasses will provide a great foundation to help stabilize that soil. And of course, They're going to look beautiful along that slope as well. So they'll add visual interest, but then they'll also be practical, and then they're helping keep that soil stabilized and not eroding, you know, if you've got that slope or hill. Here's just another example of a slight elevation or slope. And so incorporating some ornamental grasses and other kind of grass-like perennials to help prevent erosion or washout along a slope. Again, another option, thinking about, you know, maybe an area near a stormwater pond, you know, or swales or berms. These ornamental grasses continue to help stabilize the soil and prevent the edge or the shoreline to erode away. So just another option to help stabilize. Additionally, so we've kind of been thinking about, you know, grasses along and creating edges and borders, but another characteristic of these ornamental grasses is that they can add to the linear quality or provide some interest height-wise in your landscape bed. So they help elevate the bed and move the eye around as well. Here's just another example of a mixed landscape. And so you see they've got a ground cover sunshine mimosa, they've got flowering perennial, a broadleaf shrub, and then of course those ornamental grasses just kind of help fill in the bed. And so I think, you know, maybe you don't want a mass planting of ornamental grasses, but just a few ornamental grasses can help fill in a landscape bed. And of course, you know, when planted appropriately so that they don't overcrowd each other, but that they help fill in, you know, they help to prevent weeds from having space to grow in the landscape as well. Here's another picture of that beautiful muhly grass that flowers in the fall, and certainly it can help create a screen to hide things maybe in the landscape that you don't want seen. Maybe you have an AC unit, maybe you have a fence that you don't really like, but you don't really want a shrub that you might have to prune. Potentially, although if you utilize right plant, right place, it may not be a problem. But these ornamental grasses can help hide some of these less, you know, things you don't want seen in the landscape, like maybe your trash cans or your compost bins, things like that. Here's another example. We've talked about many of these ornamental grasses are drought tolerant. So when you think about plantings that are surrounded by concrete, this can be kind of a hotter microclimate. Potentially there may not be options for supplemental irrigation in some of these sidewalk plantings or plantings next to a road. And so these ornamental grasses, you know, fill in the beds nicely. They're drought tolerant, not a lot of maintenance, and can, you know, the right plant for the right place can tolerate that little hotter microclimate it might be sitting in. And of course, it looks beautiful. Definitely, you know, if you think about walking down the sidewalk and seeing these beautiful ornamental grasses or catching them from a ways and watching them blow in the breeze while you're out for a walk. Here's just another mixed landscape bed, and so you can see they've utilized flowering perennials, large shrubs, small shrubs, and of course those ornamental grasses to help fill in areas in the landscape bed. And here, I think we saw this picture earlier, but you can see, again, just ornamental grasses utilized to help, you know, along this kind of slope or this edge of this stormwater pond, really provide a beautiful scenery and are very practical to help prevent erosion. Additionally, many of the ornamental grasses we've talked about, and there are definitely more ornamental grasses that are native, can be utilized as part of a garden or a native plant garden. Certainly we've talked about Florida-friendly plants, and so Florida-friendly plants can be native or non-native, but they're adaptable and suitable for our state or our local locations, and they're not invasive. And so certainly if you prefer to utilize native plants in your landscape, many of the ornamental grasses are native, particularly Muhly grass, which is absolutely beautiful and definitely adds to a landscape. And then finally, we've talked about different ways to utilize ornamental grasses throughout the landscape, but don't forget to, utilize ornamental grasses to add kind of a vertical element to your containers as well. If you've heard one of our previous talks, we talked about container gardening, and there's the concept of thrillers, fillers, and spillers. And so an ornamental grass would definitely fill the characteristic of the thriller element, that kind of tall, spiky element in a container planting or a potted container. And so many of these ornamental grasses could be utilized and then planted around with some type of filler or spiller as well. Or even they could be utilized on their own just to add a little bit of height. Maybe you don't have a lot of room, you don't have space for an ornamental grass, but maybe you could utilize one of those ornamental grasses in a container and bring that height and that beauty of an ornamental grass closer to you on a porch or a patio or a front doorway as well. Here's a list of resources on using ornamental grasses. Today we were able to look at what is Florida-friendly landscaping and kind of how we can utilize those practices and how we maintain our landscapes. We looked at why ornamental grasses might be used in the landscape. We were able to look at pruning and dividing your ornamental grasses. We looked at several ornamental grasses that you can use in the landscape depending on maybe what characteristics you're looking for or what would fit in your landscape and your site. And then we also looked at some practical ways that ornamental grasses are used and kind of roles that they can play to not only be beautiful, but to help provide a purpose in the landscape as well. I do want to mention, if you are a resident of Polk County, Florida, we have the Polk Regional Water Cooperative, and within that group we have the conservation group that is made up of our local water utilities. And so they are providing water conservation rebates through various programs through each individual utility here in Polk County. So there are outdoor incentives for rebates for smart irrigation controllers if you need to replace your rain sensor, even a Florida-friendly landscape retrofit potentially, and then indoor incentives through toilet rebates for high-use toilets and even an indoor water conservation kit. Now this will vary by your local water utility, so I would encourage you to visit savepolkwater.org to find out more information for who to contact at your water utility to find out what programs they are offering, if they're offering them, and to find out if you're eligible. So savepolkwater.org. I want to thank you all so much for joining us today. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at IFAS Extension Polk County. You can call us, email us, visit our website, or even follow us on social media at Polk Gardening.